Welcome to Questions We're Afraid to Ask.
So speaking of politics and death if you lose, I have a question. This is an interesting question because you and I have known each other for a long time. And for a long time, you've thought some of my ideas on where the government was going to go, or where there are people who wanted the government to go, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
You thought I was crazy. You thought I was just nuts and I was crazy and I was too conspiracy theorist or whatever. So the question is, should an executive, the president or a governor, have the ability to just suspend constitutional rights for any reason, or more specifically, the new one they seem to be doing is public health? Should just by written fiat, executive order, this is now gone, right?
Well, so they've already done it. It happened during COVID.
To a point.
Well, they told people they couldn't go to church, and so that was sort of getting to that point.
That one was blatant, and people pushed back, but not as blatant as the thing that just happened.
No.
Yeah, but you're right, because but not all the states did it.
It wasn't again. But so same with this though. There's.
But did the president? I don't remember. I don't think the president actually ordered that. I think that came out more of the bureaucracy. Was like, we're going to shut down the churches.
It did, but I'm just saying it's been.
But you're right. That's where the
precedent
was started,
at least.
Mm-hmm. That's where the precedent started. COVID was. We got away with it, like at least at a minor level, we got away with it. So now let's take it and run. And the reason I bring this up, and this isn't specifically a Second Amendment thing, but it deals with the Second Amendment. The governor of New Mexico on September 8th, 2023, specifically wrote a 30-day outright ban on the carrying of open carry and concealed carry and transportation of firearms. Now, mind you, this is a state that has licensed concealed carry, where you have to go through all the background check and training and stuff to get it. And they have open carry, constitutional open carry, as a law that was passed into law by the state. You don't have to have a license to carry a gun in New Mexico.
Wasn't it specific to some certain areas, though?
She did it to a specific county that she said was the problem county. And she said she did it in direct response to some specific shooting incidents that happened, at least one of which involved a child. And it was a horrible thing that should never have happened. However, the order that was issued and the way it was issued, in the press conference, she came out and said specifically, like, the Constitution is not absolute, and I don't have to follow it. And that is a terrifying statement by an executive. And again, this was also a 30-day ban, right? It was a 30-day ban. It wasn't a permanent injunction. She wasn't that crazy. But very quickly in response to this, a judge struck it down just a few days later, like on the 13th. So she did it on the 8th, and on the 13th, the judge struck it down. And at that point, I would have been willing to let it go. If she had done the thing for the public health and the judge said, no, you can't do it, okay, that's how the system's supposed to work. Someone overreaches and the judicial branch slaps their hand and they pull it back and it stops. However, she doubled down after there had been mass protests, specifically in parks, because it's a place you can gather, and wrote it again and issued it specifically to parks where the protests were happening, specifically targeting the law-abiding citizens that were exercising their right to protest nonviolently. And I'm like,
I have a question.
And I think that I haven't seen if that one's been struck down yet or not, or if everybody was just like, lady, you're crazy. And because basically every sheriff and law enforcement in the state, except for the state police that she controls directly, has said they're not going to enforce it.
Yeah.
And even her own Democratic anti-gun attorney general said, hey, you've gone too far. Even though I'm duty bound to represent you in court cases, I will not be representing you in this because you've trampled all over the Constitution so blatantly that I just can't do it.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a Second Amendment specific thing. But should they just be able to suspend that Constitution? I mean, that's
the very clearly the answer to that is no. You shouldn't be able to do that. I mean, that's the obvious answer to the question. It also looks like that's going to be the end result of this, is that the courts are going to come back and say no. So, I mean, that's the positive side to this, is that it looks like the system's going to work. The judicial branch is going to tell a governor who's in the executive. I don't even know where
so a governor is an executive. Yeah, governors are executives, because they're like the single person in charge of running the executive side of the state.
But they're not even part of the federal executive. They're a state
executive. There's state, because like in Texas, we have a governor, we have a legislative branch, and we have a Texas Supreme Court. Just like in Colorado, they have a governor.
Did the state judge strike it down, or did a federal judge strike it down?
No, a federal judge struck it down.
Yeah, so that should be the end of the discussion at that point.
Well, I mean, she paid for private attorneys, and they're going to appeal it and all that. And the court case will take longer than the initial, the initial thing, because it was a 30-day ban, right? But when she issued it, she said, this is an emergency order, and there's some. I think it was in like either Washington State or Oregon State, where either one of the governors or one of the mayors has just finally released his executive power from COVID after 973 days or some insane time, where it was supposed to be 14 days to kill the, to stop the curve,
slow the
for the
spread,
COVID thing. It was a 14-day order, and it's been extended over 3 years.
See, and what's interesting is we talk about I hear people talking about is it was 2 weeks to slow the curve. What I remember was it was 2 weeks so we could get prepared, because everybody's going to get sick and we need to get the infrastructure ready. So if everybody can go home for 2 weeks, then we'll be prepared when this comes through in a wave on people. And that very quickly changed and went away. But
because that wasn't how it was reported.
Because that wasn't the narrative that they wanted to push anymore. But I find it interesting that that's not being. I mean, it felt like at the very beginning they knew everyone was going to get this, and they were like, "We are not ready. Everybody go home for 2 weeks so we can get equipment in the right place."
Honestly, I'm sure at the very beginning, Fauci knew everybody was going to get it because he helped engineer the damn bioweapon with China.
Okay.
To be perfectly fair,
it's not. I don't want to call it a bioweapon.
You don't have to. I will.
You can. I'm not going to call it a bioweapon. I am going to give them a modicum of the benefit of the doubt and say that they really did think that they were trying to do good work. They were just doing it in a bad facility with bad procedures and all that kind of stuff. I don't
trust them that far. But okay, fair enough. I see the point you're making, and I will give you that point, that it might have been, because to be fair, China is where most of these COVID things come out of, because it's native to that region and it's a direct threat to their population. So they may have also been doing research on how to cure their population while they poison the rest of the world. So that is entirely possible.
It did come out of the Wuhan coronavirus clinic. That's what they do there.
Like Jon Stewart said, the name's on the building,
Yeah, that was such an interesting thing that we didn't want to.
But COVID and everyone panicked so much. And the other part about the COVID stuff is it happened in stages. Like they didn't swing for the fences like the New Mexico governor just did. Guns are banned, right? She just came out and just did it, right? And she used the same language. We're doing this for 30 days to try and stop the gun violence. And here's the problem with all of this. This is what it boils down to. And we're going to talk about the constitutionality stuff and if they should have those kind of powers or not. But when you issue an order like that, the only people who are going to follow the order are law-abiding citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And New Mexico is specifically dealing with Albuquerque, a massive gang violence problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about people who can't legally own guns, can't legally possess guns, are getting them underage. There's all kinds of problems that do need to be addressed.
Yes.
And this is one of the massive critiques of this order is it targeted none of those people because they're already breaking the law. In fact, at the press conference where she announced it, somebody said, shouldn't you just enforce the laws? Like the reporter was so aghast at what she said. And she's like, no, that's absurd. I have to do this. And it's just like, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that was effectively like her response was, we can't do that. Well, we can't enforce the laws that are on the books.
And it feels
it's like police better.
It feels like there's been a breakdown of understanding of the issue of gun violence at some level. Like it feels it's because
it's not gun violence; it's violence.
Yes,
that's the problem.
And it also it feels like it's become a political football on one level. It's also become a religion, like we classify climate change. There is a portion of that community that has become activated with a religious fervor, and I think the same thing is going on in the gun control group, which is, and again, I'm not saying, I don't even want to get into it, but there is a level of unwillingness to there's an unwillingness to fully understand the argument, because what they're saying is people die from guns, therefore guns are bad, therefore guns should go away. If there were no guns, then there would be no violence, and that's the equation that they're doing. And I look at it from a different equation and go like, well, crazy people kill people, or angry people kill people. Yes, they do happen to have this very handy tool that allows them to do that very easily, but I have a hammer and it works just as well. And if I'm really angry enough, I'll use that instead.
Part of, and to be perfectly honest, part of the problem with this entire discussion is the out and out lies and misrepresentations of so many of the statistics, right? You keep hearing in the news right now, the number one killer of children in America is guns. And when you dig into it, it's been debunked. It was a study of like 18 to 19-year-olds in Michigan in this small area, and they're all dying of gang violence. And an 18 to 20, they're not children. They're legally adults.
They're adults,
right? And two, you've cut out all the children from your statistics because everyone 17 and under isn't counted. And I watched a really good breakdown of it where someone was breaking down all the statistics. He's like, look, more children die every year. They were not talking about guns in general, but they were talking about assault weapons, right? The rifles, the big, black, scary things.
Yeah.
More kids die every year of swimming pools drownings than they do being shot with an assault rifle. And so they were like, so if you really want to save a life, close a pool, which we're not going to go close down all the pools. We're just not. Right?
Is it more children die per year in pools than specifically assault rifles, or is it all guns? Because that seems.
You froze up. I didn't hear what you said.
It's okay. Is it all guns or specifically assault rifles?
I don't remember what the statistic.
Okay. I was just curious.
I think it was assault rifles. Well, the other part of it is when you look at rifles and shotguns and stuff in general, long arms, the percentage of people killed with those every year is like less than 1% of all the shootings in America. To be perfectly honest, if gun controllers wanted to actually change something and they wanted to ban something, and I do not endorse this in any way, shape, or form, it'd be ban all the handguns, because that's what people kill each other with.
Yeah.
Because to be perfectly honest, you generally get noticed if you're walking down the street with a long gun, right? In Texas, it's perfectly legal right now to throw an AR on your back and just walk down the damn street. But most people don't do it because the cop's going to stop you, and as what the hell's going on?
So I looked up the pool thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from the poolfence.com. This is Lifesavers Pool Fence. This is a company selling pool fences, saying that about 175 children under the age of 10 died in 1998 as a result of guns. About 2/3 of those deaths were homicides. There's an estimated 200 million guns in the United States. So if you do the math, there's roughly one child killed by a gun for every 1 million guns.
Okay.
So therefore, on average, if you own both a gun and a swimming pool in your backyard, your swimming pool is 100 times more likely to kill your child than your gun is.
Yes.
So,
and
not
I just
exactly,
found,
but
and I just found an article from CBS News saying 400 children die yearly on average drowning in pools and spas. How to keep your kids safe. And one of the things they talk about is getting a fence, right?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about public pools and that kind of stuff, but yeah, I mean, and again, I'm not trying to get into the weeds of this, but things are spun and told as truth. The same way this stuff happened with COVID. I mean, what was it today? No, it was yesterday that it wasn't ivermectin. It was the other one.
Hydrochloroquine.
Has been put on the Mayo Clinic as a treatment for COVID. That was,
to me,
people lost their job for saying that would actually help.
Well, hydrochloroquine was the one that Trump was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just occurred to me.
Trump was right.
So, so that was the one that I'm assuming someone told him, hey, hydrochloroquine. He was like, hydrochloroquine, because that's why he said drink bleach.
Well, it was also in that
your
first,
body, but
it was also that very first early time where he was just getting slammed with information.
If I remember correctly, that was a little deeper in.
Was it?
I think that was.
Well, he wasn't there that long for COVID. I mean, it was
3 or. It was. Well, he was there because COVID started in.
It all blurs together for me, and I do apologize if I'm misquoting the times.
I think it was almost a year of Trump during the early. Am I wrong on this? Because COVID was 20. When was the election? I will cut.
So there's an article from the National Institute of Health that's still published that says the impact of Trump's promotion of unproven COVID-19 from 2020. November of 2020, so right around the election.
So it was the whole year.
A hit piece.
It was the whole year. It was all of 2020. He was in it. So I wonder if it's in here. Find hydro. Yeah, here it is. So I found this Lloyd Doggett, U.S. representative, running, and he has a timeline of Trump's coronavirus response. And one of the things at the beginning is he disbanded the pandemic team. So it's definitely, I know he's a negative. So I just did a search on hydrochloroquine, and he's got it in here, April 7th. So that's why it was a little bit later in 2020. Yeah. You're not going to die from this pill. I really think it's a great thing to try. Trump promoting hydrochloroquine, not FDA approved to treat coronavirus. So he called it in April and said, this is something you should take.
And here's a New York Times article from May saying that he's taking it because he caught it. Remember, he caught COVID.
Yeah, I remember I remember when that happened.
Yeah.
And everybody was talking about how controversial it was that he was taking hydrochloroquine.
And now it's official, quietly, with no public pronouncement. It's been made an appropriate treatment.
And I'm going to say it again, and I know this wasn't the initial topic we were on.
Yeah.
But and I don't think we've actually talked about this, the emergency use authorization that they used to push through the mRNA vaccine, whether you like it or not, was only legally allowed to be used if there was not an alternative medicine
that was already available. That was already available. Like FDA approved. It had to be FDA approved.
Yes.
It had to be on the shelf, ready to go.
Right.
Not in testing.
Something that had already been through the process. If there was something that was shown to be effective in some way, you had to wait to push through an emergency vaccine.
Yes.
And so it appears that there was a coordinated effort to discredit some of these medicines that other countries were using. I remember
and to
India.
be fair, yes, you're right. India was using it. India was also using ivermectin.
Yes.
So were a lot of more quote unquote third world countries or lower income countries because you
they
could
were
make
using
ivermectin for
nothing.
3 cents a pill or something like that. It's been, and again, I don't know if these are magic pill drugs. I'm not saying that they are, but, and for those people, to be perfectly fair, they may have thought those aren't going to work well enough and we need this other thing. So maybe they fudge the numbers with good intentions, but you know what the path to hell is paved with,
Fudge numbers.
Yeah. Good intentions and fudge numbers. Yeah. But all this ties back in because the initial question is, should they be able to strip away our rights?
Right.
And why this is so important is, dude, 10 years ago, not even 10 years, 5 or 6 years ago, but definitely 10 years ago, if this was 2013, we've got America as the slightly drunk uncle and Canada as the kind of like puttery, sobery uncle who get along 90% of the time, right? But look at what's happened to Canada, and in some ways to England as well, because while they have constitutions, they are missing that definitive secondary document, the Bill of Rights, which specifically calls out the thing that are inalienable rights, God-given, whether you believe in God or not, that the government doesn't give to you, that you have, whether the government likes it or not. Right? That's the bit that makes the U.S. system and papers different than all the other ones. Is we have this thing that says, look, there's this list of stuff you don't get to touch.
Right.
These are off limits, and if you try to touch them, the people have a legal authority to overthrow you and replace you.
So you said 10 years ago, and so I did a quick search to check. And 10 years ago, so December 2012 was Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
Okay. So just putting us back at Sandy Hook. Imagine.
Well, most of the Canadian stuff, there has been some gun stuff there, but
let me finish with what I'm saying.
The Canadian stuff has been the stripping. Sorry, you paused. I couldn't tell. Has been the stripping of freedom of speech and seizing of bank accounts and that kind of stuff for people who are trying to protest. And Canada's going at a different way than the U.S. is.
Right. And no, I was just going to go with the New Mexico thing. So Sandy Hook was in Connecticut. So imagine if right after Sandy Hook happened, the Connecticut governor said no guns for 30 days until we sort this shit out. People would have lost their minds. Like it would have been no one would have even thought of it. Like it wouldn't have been even in anybody's mind to think about doing something like that. But now we're sitting with post-COVID. We've been willing to let everybody sort of take our rights away. And so this New Mexico governor was like, well, let's see if it'll work. Because
I think you're right.
And to be fair to her, she's just spent, I don't know how long she's been governor, but assume she's been governor for a little while. She's just spent the last few years with exorbitant power that she didn't have before as a governor. And so I'm sure at some point she's like, you know what? This is a health crisis, just like the pandemic was a health crisis. This is a health crisis. And the only way that I can fix this is to just say no guns. Just put them away for the next 30 days. And so, I can understand how she got there, but
I can too.
But to put to also then go like, well, we can just set the Constitution aside. Like, I don't think you know how that thing works. Like, I don't think you understand. You can't just put it aside.
Yeah. And this is, and the gun rights thing is a big thing for me, right? And it's less important for you, because you were raised in a household that didn't use them, and I was raised by a good old fashioned redneck gun nut, right? So I mean, I've been around it my whole life. It's not been an issue, and they were everywhere. When I remember in elementary and junior high, walking into the high school or walking to the junior high and walking to the elementary school, and the teachers' trucks the teachers were still driving trucks that had the gun rack in the back, and there was a damn rifle and a shotgun sitting in the back of the truck. It was never a problem, right? And I'm also the age that when Columbine happened, I was in secondary school, right? So I watched all this stuff start.
Yeah,
and I watched this crazy spiral that's been happening. And while these horrible school shootings have happened, and they're all tragedies and they're horrible, we haven't been taking proper steps to address them.
No.
At all. And the other thing about all of this stuff that really pisses me off, and we saw this with COVID too, is the redefinition of terms, right? Because before Barack Obama, a mass shooting was like 10 or 12 people. And after Barack Obama, a mass shooting was any shooting which involved 3 people at all, in any way, shape, or form. So if 2 thugs walked up to, or 2 gang members walked up to a third gang member and there was a shooting, that's a mass shooting if 3 people get struck, right? Yeah. When we think mass shooting, we think Columbine, we think Uvalde, we think some of these horrible things that have happened. And the reporting is massively biased because they report the tragedies, which are important to do. I'm not dismissing that. But you almost never hear, unless it's the local news, you don't hear so-and-so tried to do something and was stopped by a legally armed citizen. Those stories almost never make the news.
Well, that's the wrong narrative.
Exactly. It's also why if a mass shooter happens to not be white or some tragedy thing, it kind of gets brushed away. Just look at the last one. We have this transgendered person who shot up the school, and we were supposed to find out all this information, and they've buried it all. And they just they don't talk about it. After like a week, it was gone. It was gone from the narrative.
And I'm of 2 minds on that, because one mind of mine is we do not want to inflate this person beyond what they need to be inflated, because that we do see copycats, we do see people saying,
and that is part of the problem. Yes.
So there's that. But the other side of this is, well, I mean, that gets into the transgender discussion, is that is it possible that what that person was going through is the reason that they did this, and some of the things that they had done earlier in their life to potentially, were part of this. Did it say in the diary, I wish I'd never done what I did, and it was the worst decision I ever make, and I'm going to go and I hope I die, and they don't want it. So there is the potential that things could be suppressed for bad reasons and good reasons. Well, I mean, let's get topical here. Look at what's happening to Russell Brand in the news right now. Now, setting aside whether he did it or not, because to be fair, nobody knows what actually happened except the people who were there. So look at how the narrative is being put together. It's all attack. It's everybody. It's at the same time. It's, and he was talking about it. He put a post up today. It's the Trusted News Network. There's this old boys club of all the big news networks, and I was listening to his piece. If you read through it, their mission is to squash and destroy independent journalism.
Yes.
That's their goal.
Tie all of that, the suppression of the information on the shooters, the Russell Brand stuff, everything that happened during COVID. And we don't trust our information sources or the government anymore.
Yeah.
That is a complete loss of faith with the public. And that leads to, while I believe the people who say we don't want to put this out because we think it's a blueprint for other people to do mass shootings, because apparently that particular person did massive amounts of research on it, and it's all out there on how to go do it. And they don't want to put out a manifesto or a workbook on how to go do it.
A guidebook.
I understand that. But so many people don't trust the government now that we're like, yeah, bullshit, you're trying to hide something. That's my first thought, even though I understand where they're coming from, right? And that's part of the problem. that stuff needs to be dissected by people other than just the FBI, because we don't trust the FBI anymore. You know, what used to be one of the best institutions and most trusted institutions in all of the United States has blown its credibility 100%.
Well, and the way I feel about the institutions is there are enough things that have happened that are shady enough that I just don't have faith that you have my best interest anymore. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, how many times have we seen federal agents on video go up and straight up lie to somebody to try and get them to do something? And there's a big video of an ATF agent who was like, "Look, you have to bring your guns out and show them all to me so I can check the serial numbers." It's like, look, if any law enforcement agent shows up at your door and says, "You got to show this to me because I said so," you ask for a warrant and you ask for a lawyer right there. And if they don't have that warrant, you know, you don't have to let them in and show them the stuff by and large. Now, I'm not a legal expert. Go consult your attorney. But, you know, my attorney has always told me that don't ever do anything for a cop unless they have a warrant. And if they come up, call me. You know, the first thing you do is call me. And that's just good advice for anybody. You know, my brother's a cop, and he will tell me, hey, cops will try and talk you into showing stuff that you probably shouldn't do. And he's done it to people just through polite conversation. I mean, he's had drug busts where he's like, hey, man, you know, this was a traffic stop. Yeah, you mind popping the trunk so we can just take a peek? And he's so conversational with him. The guy pops the trunk and, oh, look, there's, you know, 4 or 5 pounds of pot and drug money and coke in the back. And boom, drug bust, right?
I've been watching. There's videos on YouTube. There's all sorts
I know you're down this rabbit hole thing.
I can't quite figure out why it's so interesting, but it's just watching people making bad life decisions. I don't know exactly what it is, but there have been enough of those that I've seen where, you know, the woman is out and he goes, "Hey, can I go look through your purse?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." I'm like, "What are you doing? Why would you tell?" You know, and then she had 6 fake IDs, but I'm just like, why would you say yes? I mean, the thing that I've always been told is always say no. Like, and not in a rude way, but like, do you mind getting out? Do I have to? Yes, that's an order. Okay. Then you can then I'll get out. Like, can we search your car? I'd rather you not. Well, we're going to do it anyway. Well, I'm going to ask that you not. Well, it's not up to you. Okay. And then, you know, but like, that's also, you hear the, like, I don't answer questions. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that, and again, every state's different. So find out what the laws are.
Absolutely.
But my brother's like, if a cop pulls you over, show him your license, show him your insurance, and you're done.
Yeah.
You're done. Everything else is just.
Yeah. You don't have to give them anything else.
Unless they ask for like a name. It's like, is this name correct? Yeah, that's my name. Is the address correct? Yeah, that's my address. Right?
And
those kind of things.
I'm not rude with police.
Well, the other part is
stop.
Be polite. Be polite.
Yeah, don't be confrontational. You're polite. You say hi, how you doing? You having a good day? Oh, okay.
Yep. Hello, officer. Thank you. Yes. I won't be answering any more of your questions, officer.
Yeah,
I hope you understand. You know, I hope you have a great day. You know, if it's a ticket, give me the ticket. Yeah. You know,
typically I will tell them where I'm coming from and where I'm going, because they always ask, because I'm usually coming from school and going home, or I'm going from home to school. Like, so it doesn't matter. But like anything beyond that, they're like, you know, what are you up to today? Nothing.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the last time I got a ticket, the cop asked me, he's like, where are you going? And I said, you know, my wife thinks she's going into labor. She just called me and told me she thinks she's going into labor and she's got the kids. So yes, officer, I was speeding. All right, well, I'm going to write you a ticket. I'm like, okay, thanks, man.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. You know, off.
Yeah. But I think that's the other thing that I've noticed is a lot. I think maybe I'm watching these to like, partly because I think I need to prepare my children for how to deal with the police. And so being able to see how modern police are being because I remember my dad gave me some advice as a kid on how to deal with police. It was really bad advice. He told me once to get out of the car and talk to the police officer, and I found out later that is absolutely not what you do ever in any situation ever. And so
yeah, I got out of the car once, and it was a cop I actually knew, and he's like, "Don't ever do that again. Don't ever get out again. We take that as an escalation." I was like, "Oh, I just getting you my driver's license and stuff,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it's interesting to see people not understand how to communicate with authority, and I think that's part of that.
That's a huge part of it.
Is that like there are people telling you to do something, and right now nobody wants to be told what to do. I've been told what to do for a long time, and there's this thing of the police are bad and they're out to get me, and there's a lot of that going on right now as well. And so I think there's a lot of hostility in there. And then you also have to realize that the cops are totally on edge the entire time because they're worried they're going to get shot.
They're understaffed. They're overworked. Several cops have been assassinated recently, and I say that because they've been planned execution style killings of cops. There was one this past week, and so they're stressed out. There's a reason my brother likes to work in a small town, and he won't even consider a big city job. He used to go do side work, in the big city, just down the road, and he stopped doing that during COVID. He was like, "It's not worth the money. My life is not worth the money." Yeah. And we were worried about him. This was when all the George Floyd stuff was happening too, and all that, and because he was making really good money on those side gigs. We're not talking like chump change. He made a lot more money doing that side work on the weekends than he did doing his real job. But again, it wasn't worth it. But this all comes back to, I think it's a power problem, and this is a historical problem with government. Government wants more power. Government wants more control. Government will try and seize more power and more control, which is why, the framers of the Constitution framed it the way they did, because when you go back and read the Constitution and you go back and read the Bill of Rights, it is limits to government power. Specifically is what the document is. It wasn't how to set up a government. It was how can we box this government thing in?
Here are the things you can't do. You can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. You can't make people do this, and you can't stop. And what we're starting to see is that they're pushing that boundary. And I'm going to shift this over. Look at what the government was doing to try to suppress speech on the internet.
Yeah.
Alex Berenson was just on Rogan last week talking about he's still in the process of suing the U.S. government for getting him kicked off Twitter, and I think it's Twitter. But like he has a legitimate case. The government, he's got the he's got the emails. He's like, this dude emailed this guy at Google and said, get him off of the platform. He's saying things we don't want him to say. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. Again, to take it back over to Russell Brand, the same thing's happening to him. He's saying things that people don't want him to say. And so they went, all right, well, let's just pull him off every service that we can. Let's try and cut him off at the knees and take his money out.
If you want to get conspiratorial, somebody tried to kill Kennedy the other day, and was dressed as a security officer, tried to get on the detail. And if anybody has a right to be worried that the government's going to put a hit out on him, it's Kennedy Jr., because we all know the government killed his uncle and killed his dad, right? Yeah. I mean, it's basically proven at this point. And if you want to argue with me about it, I really did not know a lot about his dad's thing until I listened to him explain all the autopsy stuff and look at all the reports. And I've gone and looked at that because it's in the public record.
Yeah, that autopsy's in the record.
Yeah, the stuff's in the public record. It's not like it's hidden around. And I'm like, well, yeah, once again, the number of bullets and stuff don't add up to the gun the guy was using and everything else. And, physics and stuff are kind of inconvenient that way. It's the same reason. Anybody who wants to tell me that there was a lone gunman who killed Kennedy doesn't know a goddamn thing about guns and has never fired one in their damn life, because I've shot that damn rifle, and you can't pull it off. It's not physically possible. No one's ever been able to pull the shots off.
Put all the physics aside. And let's just say that people in the plaza heard more shots.
There's that too. Saw more gunmen. Saw more gunmen.
And someone said, no, that came from behind me over there.
Yeah.
Like, not, up there on the knoll. Like, people...
Hell, Jackie Kennedy's security guard, who was part of the Secret Service, just came out and is writing a book. Now that he's about to die, he's so old. And he said he's finally comfortable telling the story because what are they going to do? Kill him now? It's just like... And that's the problem here is government power, and they think with this health thing, they've figured out I've got a lever that I can just now gut everybody up and just for the people, for the children, for the health, for the safety.
Well, and I think that we're actually very lucky in the grand scheme of things, I think, that the pandemic happened. Because I think what it caused was an escalation much faster than they would have the grand
incremental one that had been coming.
Yes. And so it kicked it so fast that people pushed, and now there's people looking, and now people are paying attention, and they're going, whoa,
because what it
we're
did,
watching you now.
You're right, because what it did is it burnt through the public trust and that capital of political trust that had been built up for decades and decades and decades. And people were like, wait a minute, you lied to us. It's like the joke about the Alex Jones conspiracy theory thing. It's like, how many has he gotten right now, right? Or, it's not, you're not a conspiracy theorist anymore. You're just well-read. It's and you've seen it when you've argued with your parents about some of the stuff,
Yeah.
I think that's another problem is there are certain people who at some point, for whatever reason, they disassociate with new information and they're unwilling to accept it, either because their ideology is so strong that it's basically a religion, or maybe they get older.
I think also there's the idea of like a lot of people's priorities are set in such a way that figuring this out is so low on the list of priorities that they've farmed that off to someone else to I'll just get that from this source. And some people use 10 sources. My dad reads a bunch of papers. He reads all sorts of stuff. So he has a lot of sources that he goes to. Some people go to one source. They go to MSNBC, they go to CNN, they go to Fox News,
whatever.
they go to whatever, they go to the what's that one? There's a crazy right-wing one on the internet that I can't think of.
The Babylon
right
Bee?
No, that's the joke one.
Axios?
Awesome.
Is it Axios?
No, Axios isn't too. It's the Breitbart. Like some people go to Breitbart.
Yeah.
That, and the thing about a lot of these is they're good news up to a point. Like they're telling you things that are happening, but you gave me an idea the other day about pulling up doing a separate thing and pulling up articles and going through and breaking them down like I do now. Like there's been a number of times and you and I've been doing it where we'll do it on the phone at the same time where I'm like, oh, look at this article. It says that this and this and this happened. And you're like, okay, let's see. Okay, it's this bill here. Let me go read this thing and read this and go, okay, so they're not lying, but they're definitely not telling you the truth here. Like, and that was sort of when I started to break down on this as well, when you realize that like they're not lying, but they're definitely skewing it, and then sometimes
outright misrepresenting it.
Exactly.
Which is like that study about the children with guns thing. It's drastically misrepresented, and it's just blatant. I mean, it's to the point where it's almost a blatant lie. And that's the problem, because now you have a talking point. And you have a rallying cry. And here's where it really gets down to, whether you want to call it violence or gun violence or gang violence or whatever this is. The statistics show that there's a very small percentage of the population that is doing a huge percentage of these things, these violent acts.
Yes.
And No one wants to attack the systemic underlying problems that cause this. We were talking about this the other day, where, if I'm remembering right, where we see the most violent crime in areas where you have the poorest of the poor and the wealthiest of the wealthy.
So,
if I'm remembering it right,
you're on the right track. It's the greater the disparity between rich and poor, the
in a given
higher
area,
the crime.
right? In a given area, yeah.
Yeah. So if you have an area that is just very affluent, then you'll be fine. If you have an area where everybody's poor, you're going to be fine. But when you put the slums next to, well, but I mean the level of
I get what you're saying, because the slums
in the community goes down.
The slums is if all you okay. So let's take one of the, and it's not slums, such a derogatory word. I don't like it, but we'll take one of those super poor towns in like West Virginia that was a coal town or whatever that's now basically shut down. There is crime there. And a lot of the crime is like drug manufacture and that kind of stuff, but there's not a lot of violent crime there.
Right. And I think that's more what they're, but again,
but where you have let me finish. Where you have the, gangs and stuff in the poor areas, but you have the money to feed into it. Then you see the infighting. Then you see the gang violence. Then you see the people stabbing and shooting people over street corners, because we're talking about profit margin now, right? And the value of a life is poor. Hell, you can take it to a macro level. Look at Western Mexico, where the cartels run. That is one of the poorest parts of that country, slapped right up next to one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the United States. Why the hell do you think there is a problem on the border with drugs moving back and forth like crazy?
Yeah.
It's because, and you would talk about violence, cartels are rather violent people, right? There's been many stories about some of the stuff that they've done.
The larger point that you're making here, which can be echoed in the two strikes that are, well, one that might be ending and one that's still ongoing with the auto workers, is that profits over people is what everybody does. Everybody does profits over people.
That's the game.
Which means money is evil.
Yeah, well, however, we've never been able to figure out a functional economy that doesn't include price. And that was something I really didn't understand until I started reading Stowell's Basic Economics book, right? Mm-hmm. And he's not talking about money per se, but he's talking about how, and I'm not to say that there's not a method to do it. We just haven't figured it out yet. For a way to properly allocate resources so that they're not wasted and they're not rotting away and they're not being misused. It's like price drives resource management better than anything else we've figured out so far.
Do you know what the first money was?
Dude, it was probably a shiny pebble or something.
Babylonian.
Well, that we know of in recorded history. Okay, that's different. I'm sorry, you were like, you said money, and I was like,
it's the shekel, and its value was one bundle of wheat.
It was tied to a commodity.
And I think that's part of what we've lost, is when we separated ourselves from gold.
Yeah.
And we just made the money point float.
You mean when the government stole everybody's gold and then jacked the price up? The greatest robbery in history was done by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Depression, when he stole everybody's gold. And if you've never looked this up, go look up what they did. They forced everybody to turn their gold in. And then immediately after they seized it, they like tripled the price of gold or something like that. Because they had so much that they could dominate the world market. And now we don't even know if we have a gold reserve, because they won't let anybody into Fort Knox to go and look.
Could you imagine if it was empty?
Oh, I bet it is. I bet it's empty. I mean, we've got to use the gold somehow. It's actually used now. It's not just a shiny metal. We use it in all these nifty electronics.
Yeah.
There's practical uses of it.
Since I'm off on this topic, I'm going to talk about it for a second. It's interesting that we value gold.
Yeah, that's hardwired into us.
Well, it's one of those things. That's one of the things that you get to those ideas where you get old of, like, well, gold is, we see now, incredibly sorry, some little
bubbles
thing
showed up on your thing. That was weird.
That was strange. I don't know where that came from. That gold is so important for space travel, and it's incredibly important for electronics. And then if you argue the idea that ancient space people came here and turned humans into workers to mine gold, stitching a little bit, but also other stuff, that would explain why gold, which really to a caveman doesn't really have any value other than it's shiny.
It's pretty. Yeah.
It's pretty. But lots of things are pretty and don't have a lot of value. And so it's interesting that this one thing that's this incredibly important thing is so
one of the things
prized.
if I were going to make a non-aliens argument for it, it would be because gold is soft enough and has a low enough melting point that it's easily worked cold, that it could have been a very early metal art form. And because all you really need to work gold is a rock and a way to heat it up. And we know we've had fire since before we were Homo sapiens, right? So much like copper, gold is one of those easy worked metals, right? And
is it easily obtained though? Don't you have to dig it all out?
It depends. There are places there are places where it's just in the creek and you see it. I mean, now, yes, a lot of it has been dug out, but we also don't know where all of it came from. And there's been a lot of gold in circulation for a long time. And we don't necessarily know where the gold mines were, right? But the huge part of the gold rush was people panning for gold.
They found a really old one in Africa that apparently is a couple.
I'm sure there's some evidence of it, but there's, all the gold in Egypt, right? Where did all that come from? All the gold in the Roman Empire,
from Mexico.
This is, so we don't know where it came from, but it's easily worked, right? If I had to pick two metals that I needed to work with, and I didn't have forging stuff, it would be copper and it would be gold. Yeah. And I would honestly prefer copper because I could make more practical stuff out of that. As far as like utility tools and weapons and that kind of stuff, knives and those. And for everybody who thinks, ooh, weapons bad. I mean, our first tool was a knife, right? And the other violence problem is the violence isn't going to go away. We're not going to civilize ourselves out of violence. Violence goes back to one of the first stories in the book of Genesis. Cain killed his brother.
It's technically
there's the creation story. It depends on how you define it.
The first story with people.
Well, there's the Adam and Eve stuff.
But Adam and Eve aren't technically human. They were created. So the first two,
fair enough.
The first two born people.
All it took was for two brothers. Two brothers.
That's it.
Not get along, and somebody died. Right? Over pure jealousy. Pure jealousy. So these emotions and stuff are raw, and they're in us, and they're there. And the culture that breeds it is so much older than I knew about. And I've been reading Sowell's, or I've been listening to Sowell's Black Rednecks, White Liberals, and it's breaking down where all that stuff. And I mean, I grew up with like redneck pride and all that kind of stuff. It's toned down over the years, but I thought it was a uniquely American thing. And to come to find out that no, like terms like cracker and wisecrack actually go back to the British Isles and before we ever came over here. I was like, it's completely blown my mind. And to watch those culture patterns move from ethnic group to ethnic group and social group to social group is fascinating to me.
The British accent actually changed
after the revolution, right?
After the revolution, and became more posh like it is now. And so the joke I always loved was that Kevin Costner actually got Robin Hood's accent exactly right, because that's what it would have sounded like then before it became British. But he was actually probably closer to right than Alan Rickman, who was actually British.
And what's interesting is you go back and the Stowell book is talking about like Black language and Black culture in inner city America and that kind of stuff. And he's like, it's not originally their culture. It's an adopted culture from the the white people who had come over here from England, and they passed it on, and a lot of the verbiage and stuff. Because he goes and he quotes like some Southern gentry people, and it's very, very similar to the way some of those cultural speech patterns are still being used in the black community. It's not everybody, but they're there in some ways. Like the big one for me was like axe. I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like that. And I've always associated that with, but it's tied to others too. And then he also makes the point about how easily violence came to that culture. And it's that Northern British, Scottish, borderland, Welsh, old Celt culture. All it took was the slightest insult for friends to kill each other. And the number of duels that were fought. And they said it was, the violence was there regardless of wealth strata. It was just how you went about it, right? If you were wealthy, you fought a duel. If you weren't, you were, no holds barred street fight. And, and some of the terms that were used, I was just like, it blew me away. The book has blown me away. As somebody who thought they understood American history, I'm realizing there are huge aspects of it that I've just never studied. But all this time, I kind of got
tag on that. I think that's it doesn't matter. I think that's where I'm at as well. You're seeing it in American history, and I'm sort of spiraling all the way back, going like, oh, we're wrong the whole way back. Like we've been told things, either passed down through some history or or whatever, but like as you start to look into this more and more, what we knew when I went through high school, we know a lot more than we did then about a lot of these things. But also just like it is, I don't know, I'm so blown away by the fact how wrong we really are.
Well, yeah, especially when it comes to the history of the world and
we're
culture.
Sitting at it's 30,000 years, man. It's 30,000 years. It easily could be
the joinery thing. The two pieces of wood joined together. 500 million years or half a million years old.
500,000.
500,000. Yeah, but because I love woodworking and I've been learning about that and everything. And joinery is just like the foundation of woodwork, like to cut and form two pieces of thing together. And the amount of talent it takes to do that with relatively modern tools, even though I use old-fashioned hand tools, they're doing it with stone tools.
Yeah.
To work two pieces of wood together with sharp flint? No, thank you. No. And probably pre-Homo sapien. Probably pre-Homo sapien. And
500,000.
I mean, it depends on we honestly we don't know the datings, but there's a very good chance it was something else.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, because we had Neanderthals running around. We had
it could have been Denisovans. It could have been. I don't know. I don't remember where it was.
I don't either. But there was more than one. There was more than one. There was more than one genus Homo running around at the time.
Very much so.
Was it the elf, the dwarf, or the hobbit? We don't know.
But we've pushed back that number again.
Yeah. Massively.
500,000 years ago, there were. I mean, if you're joining pieces of wood together, you're building houses, man. Like I don't know what else you're making. Maybe you're making a chair, but like you've got to be building structures at that point.
Exactly.
If you're joining pieces together.
Whether you're actually doing the math or not, you have to have a fundamental understanding of geometry.
Yes.
For that to work. So the idea that they were more primitive than we were intellectually is completely blown out of the water too, right? The creativity necessary to invent the joint for joinery is huge. You cannot overemphasize how important that is. I don't know how we got from government control to joinery, but we did.
That is manipulation of the environment
to suit your needs. Yeah.
to suit your need. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
significant.
It is
and
massively modifying the environment to make your life easier.
Yeah. And to try and tie it all back together again. What we really need to realize is that we're more complicated than we think we are.
Yes.
For one thing. And we need to realize that the people in power are as complicated as we are. And then we also all need to go, okay.
Well, and to add on to that, the problems we're
somewhere.
trying to deal with are massively more complex than we think they are. And I am, and this will tie it back to government and politics and all this. I am tired of the whitewash one item solution. It doesn't work. We're going to do this.
Oh, yes.
And fix it. No,
Yeah.
it doesn't. It doesn't fix that. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. There are systemic problems that need to be fundamentally discussed. And until we can see each other's point of view, we don't have to agree with the point of view. We have to at least understand how the person got there. We can't talk about the problem, right? If someone wants to try and talk to me about gun violence, and I'll throw out all my problems with, and say that guns need to be restricted, there has to be a dialogue. And they also have to understand that I have a point, and there's a reason I have a point, right?
Yeah.
And if they can't, they don't have to agree with how I got there, but they have to understand how I got there and give me legitimacy that I put together an argument that is at least somewhat sound. Right?
I'll give you an example on this. It's the, and we're not going to get into it. It's the men don't get to have an opinion on abortion.
Yeah.
Like if you but they do. They still have an opinion. Whether or not you want to hear it, or whether or not you agree with me, believe me, or want to whatever,
or whether we make policy on it or not.
But you should be willing to listen to my argument, but and be able to hear it. And the problem that you run into is, here is my argument, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And the other person just says like, well, they just say, well, you're wrong.
Because you're different. Because you're different and you don't meet my parameters, you don't get an opinion. Right.
And what I always try to do, and we do it on here all the time, is sort of like we did with the New Mexico governor. I can understand how she got where she got. I don't agree with any of the decisions that she made.
To be perfectly honest, if I believed in gun control and getting rid of all of them, good idea.
Yeah.
The problem, and one of the biggest critiques, and I think why so many people, kind of bring it back, why so many people blew up at her, even people who have said guns should go away forever, right?
Yeah.
We're like, no, you can't do this. You've gone too far.
Right.
And I think they left off the other part is, you've gone too far too fast. You've just derailed this for us now. Right.
Well, and I also think there's a level of like, hey, there are rules here. Like,
yeah. Because I think people are starting to see
the number 2 rule.
Well, I think it goes beyond that. I think people are starting to see, they're getting a little too powerful and a little too happy with this power grab thing. And they may decide to use it against me next. So in a way, what do you know? I mean, when Americans are squabbling with each other, the last thing you want to be is the person who gets them to go and look at you the same and go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like, you can have the anti-gunners and the pro-gunners completely arguing and fighting, which is kind of what's happened. And somebody went, ban all the guns by executive fiat. And they went, whoa, wait a minute. Hold on a second here. That's just burning the Constitution to the ground. And I need to be able to say what I want to say to make my point. And both sides are saying that now. Because if you can go after the Second Amendment that way, by God, sure as hell can take away the first too.
Yeah.
And then we just start, then there's no rules. Then, there is no check on the government and it's a runaway train. And if you don't think that's a problem, just look at the crap that happened during COVID in England, where a woman who they thought was silently praying as she happened to walk by an abortion clinic got arrested. And it was adjudicated for over a year before they decided to drop the charges. because a cop thought she was praying silently as she walked. I mean, my God, what's happening to the Western world? It's
we believe that OxyContin is not addictive. But that's what's in the FDA report.
I know.
I believe
because they got some FDA guy in a hotel for 2 days or whatever. Yeah, that was fascinating to hear those stories.
All right, well let's wrap it up here.
Yeah.